I'm Jessica. I'm 32 years old, and my own father told me I wasn't worthy of a seat at the family table in front of the entire board of directors. Before I tell you how a single 1-inch thick folder I left behind that day triggered the spectacular collapse of his multi-million-dollar company, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know who I'm talking to. The air in the Novak Logistics boardroom was always the same: stale, cold, and heavy, with the scent of expensive leather and unspoken resentments. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind you of your place in the food chain. For my entire life, it had done its job flawlessly. I stood by the door, feeling the polished wood against my back, a silent observer in a play I was supposed to be a part of. Every single seat at that colossal mahogany table was occupied. At its head, my father, Richard Novak, sat enthroned, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture radiating an unshakable authority. He refused to look at me, his eyes fixed instead on my younger cousin, Wren Caldwell. Wren, fresh out of an Ivy League college with a degree in art history and zero experience in logistics, was fidgeting with his tie, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. He was the man of the hour. To my father's right, my brother Dominic was practically glowing. He was the company's golden boy, the charismatic heir apparent, and he was soaking in the impending celebration. He caught my eye across the expanse of polished wood and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug. It was a perfectly crafted gesture, one that looked like sympathy to the untrained eye, but I knew what it was: a gloating little twist of the knife. See, this is how it's always going to be. My father cleared his throat, and the low murmur of conversation immediately ceased. His voice, when it came, was a low boom that commanded attention. As you all know, he began, his gaze sweeping over the board members, we're here today to celebrate innovation, to celebrate the future of Novak Logistics. And that future, I'm proud to say, is brighter than ever, thanks to the groundbreaking new logistics framework developed by our own rising star, Wren Caldwell. A wave of polite, perfunctory applause rippled around the table. Wren puffed out his chest. Dominic beamed as if he'd personally invented the microchip. My project, my framework. The result of 6 months of 18-hour days, of weekends sacrificed, of coding until my eyes burned. The project I had passionately presented to my father, only to be told it was too academic and lacked real-world grit. I had the proof in my briefcase, every email, every time-stamped file, every draft. But looking at the solid wall of indifferent or hostile faces, I knew it was useless. The truth had no seat at this table. My father finally deigned to look at me. His eyes were cold, not with anger, but with something far worse: sheer indifference. He was looking at me like I was a piece of furniture that needed to be moved, an annoying logistical problem. Jessica, he said, his tone final, we're about to discuss confidential financial projections based on Wren's work. You can wait outside. Dominic couldn't help himself. He leaned forward, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, dripping with a disgusting mix of pity and contempt. Why would we waste a seat on you? That was it. That was the sound of the last thread snapping. All the years of being overlooked, of being the quiet, reliable engine in the background, while Dominic was the shiny hood ornament, coalesced into a single moment of absolute chilling clarity. The rage I expected to feel wasn't there. In its place was a profound, liberating calm. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I pushed myself off the wall and walked toward the table, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. I placed my briefcase on an empty chair and looked directly at my father. You're right, I said, my voice steady and clear. You shouldn't waste a seat on me. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my employee ID badge, and placed it gently on the polished table. It slid a few inches and came to rest next to my father's Mont Blanc pen. Next to it, I placed a thick 1-inch blue folder. I won't be waiting outside, I announced to the room. I resign, effective immediately. I turned my head and looked at Dominic, then at Wren. The smirks had vanished from their faces, replaced by confusion and a flicker of panic. Good luck with the project, I said, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. You're going to need it. I turned and walked out of that room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their stunned silence pressing against my back. As the heavy door clicked shut, sealing them in their tomb of lies, I could picture my father's face, contorted with rage. I could see him snatching up the folder, expecting a simple 2-line resignation letter. But what he'd find inside was a meticulously prepared 30-page report. It was a weapon disguised as a document, detailing every line of code I'd written, every data model I'd built, complete with sworn affidavits from IT about file creation dates and a full record of my email chains. He didn't know it yet, but I hadn't just quit my job. I had pulled the pin on a grenade and rolled it right into the center of his kingdom. To really get why I dropped that bomb in the boardroom, you have to understand it wasn't about that one project. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being treated like a function, not a daughter. The Family Playbook was written before I was born. Dominic was the star, the charismatic leader in waiting. I was the supporting character, the reliable, intelligent, and utterly invisible nerd. This script played out in every aspect of our lives. I remember one summer when I was 12. I'd spent the entire school year in an advanced math league. I made it to the state finals. The award ceremony was on a Saturday. I told my parents about it for weeks. On the morning of the ceremony, I came downstairs in my only dress suit. My shoes shined, my stomach a knot of nerves and excitement. My father was in the kitchen on the phone, laughing. "You got it, Coach. We'll be there. The whole family." He hung up and turned to me, beaming. "Big news, Jessica. Dominic's baseball team made it to the regional tournament. It's this weekend. We're all driving down to support him." I just stared at him. "But my award ceremony is today. It's the finals." He waved a dismissive hand, his good mood not even dented. "Oh, right. Well, it's just an award, sweetheart. This is a tournament. It's important for the team, for your brother." My mother chimed in from the stove. "We can't be in two places at once. Honey, you understand. Family supports family." So my grandfather, a quiet man who rarely spoke, drove me 3 hours to the state capitol. I accepted my first place medal on a massive stage, and the only person in the audience cheering for me was an old man who smelled of pipe tobacco. Meanwhile, the rest of my family was 100 miles away, screaming their lungs out because Dominic had successfully hit a ball with a stick. I still have the medal. It sits in a box, a cold, heavy reminder of my place in the family's universe. That pattern became even more pronounced when we entered the professional world of Novak Logistics. I came in armed with dual master's degrees, overflowing with ideas. One of my first assignments was to analyze client retention. I found that our top 20 clients were being handled by a team that relied on steak dinners and golf games, but their actual performance metrics were terrible. I built a comprehensive analytical suite that could predict client dissatisfaction with 90% accuracy based on delivery times, error rates, and communication logs. It was a tool that could save millions. I presented it to my father and the executive team. Before I could even finish, Dominic, who had been doodling on a legal pad, interrupted. "Dad, with all due respect, this is a little cold. Our business is built on relationships. You can't reduce a client like Mr. Henderson to a bar graph." My father nodded sagely. "Your brother has a point, Jessica. It's about the human touch. This is too detached." 6 months later, at the annual client appreciation dinner, Dominic stood up and gave a speech. He announced a new proactive client relations initiative, which was a dumbed-down, marketing-friendly version of my system. He'd taken my core algorithms, slapped a fancy name on them, and presented them as his own stroke of genius. He got a standing ovation. I sat at a table in the back, watching him take credit for my work, and felt a familiar bitter taste rise in my throat. The only person who ever called them on it was Aunt Sophia. She was my father's older sister, a woman who possessed all the intelligence in the family, with none of the arrogance. She was sharp, funny, and battling a sickness that was slowly stealing her strength but could never touch her spirit. One Christmas, after watching Dominic regale the family with a story about a tough negotiation he'd won, a negotiation for which I had prepared the entire 50-page briefing document, she cornered me by the fireplace. "You know your father was the smart one too," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. She looked over at my father, who was laughing loudly at one of Dominic's jokes. "Our father, your grandfather, was a tyrant. He wanted a son who was a bulldog, not a poet. He used to mock Richard for reading books, called him weak. I think your father looks at you and sees the child he was forced to kill inside himself. And he looks at Dominic and sees the child our father always wanted." Her insight was so sharp it hurt. "Don't let them do it to you, Jessica," she said, her grip on my arm surprisingly tight. "Don't let them extinguish your fire. But I was still trying to play by the rules. I still held on to a sliver of hope that logic and merit would eventually win. So I scheduled a formal meeting with my mother. In her capacity as HR director, I thought she had to be objective. Her office was a shrine to Dominic. Photos of his sports teams, his college fraternity, even a framed article from the local paper about him winning a charity golf tournament. Tucked behind a large plant on her credenza was a single small framed photo of me at my MIT graduation. I laid my case out on her desk, not with emotion, but with facts. I had printouts of my performance reviews, all glowing. I had project summaries, ROI calculations, and a side-by-side comparison of my qualifications versus Dominic's. She listened with a practiced patient expression, the one she used for disgruntled employees. When I finished, the silence stretched. She steepled her fingers, her face a mask of carefully constructed sympathy. "Jessica," she began, her tone soft and reasonable, "I hear you. I truly do. And your work is technically excellent, but you have to see the bigger picture. Leadership isn't just about spreadsheets. Dominic has a natural charisma and ability to connect with people. He inspires confidence. That's a rare quality. It's what your father and the board see as essential for the future of this company." "So my contributions don't matter?" I asked, my voice flat. "Of course they matter," she said smoothly, the lie sliding off her tongue with ease. "You are an invaluable asset to the team, but every player has a different role. Yours is to provide the support and analysis that allow leaders like your brother to succeed. You need to be a team player, Jessica. Don't create waves. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the family." The cold, corporate doublespeak was more brutal than any insult. She wasn't just my mother. She was the chief enforcer of the family narrative. She saw the injustice clearly, and she chose to uphold it. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd been hollowed out. The final devastating blow came not from my family, but from the man I was going to make my family, David. We had been engaged for 6 months. I loved him. I trusted him. He was my sanctuary from the toxicity of my family. He worked in Novak's marketing department, so I thought he saw the dynamics as clearly as I did. He was the one who would rub my back when I came home late, furious and dejected after another slight. "They're fools, Jess," he would murmur. "One day they'll see what you're really worth." I was working late one Tuesday night, trying to debug a catastrophic server failure in Dominic's department. He was nowhere to be found, of course. I texted David that I'd be home late. Around 9:30 p.m., I finally gave up and went to look for Dominic to get an emergency sign-off. His office light was off, but the door was cracked open. I heard voices from inside, a man's low murmur and a woman's laugh. A laugh I knew as well as my own heartbeat. My heart stopped. I pushed the door open. The scene is seared into my brain. Dominic was leaning against his desk, and my younger sister was standing between his legs, her hands on his shoulders, his on her waist. They were mid-laugh, their faces close together, illuminated by the glow of the city outside his window. It was intimate, it was easy, it was a world I had no part in. They saw me at the same time. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Dominic had the grace to look shocked for a second before his default arrogance clicked back into place. My sister just looked trapped. My mind went blank. I couldn't form a word. I just backed out of the office and walked down the deserted hallway, my legs feeling like lead. She caught up to me by the elevators. "Jessica, wait. I was going to tell you," the classic line. "Tell me what?" I managed to say, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "That you're sleeping with my fiancé? How long has this been going on?" She had the decency to look down at her expensive shoes. A few months. The timeline crashed down on me. Months of her feigning sympathy, of telling me I was a hidden genius, all while she was sleeping with the very person who was holding me down. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Why? It was the only question that mattered. And for the first time, she looked me straight in the eye. There was no love there, no remorse, just a cold, hard pragmatism that chilled me to the bone. "I'm sorry, Jess," she said, and her tone made it clear she was only sorry she got caught. "He offered me a future, a real future, with you. I just felt so stuck." Stuck. That word again. The verdict on my life. "He's on a partnership track," she continued, as if that explained everything. "Your salary is fine. It's good. But you have to be realistic. He's going to be running this place one day. I have to think about my career, my life." She had done a cost-benefit analysis on our relationship. She had weighed my love, our future, our life together, against a promotion and a bigger paycheck. and I had lost. I wasn't the woman he loved. I was a stock that had stopped performing. I didn't say another word. I just turned, walked out of that building, got in my car, and drove. I had no destination. I just drove until the city lights were a faint glow in my rearview mirror. I finally understood the full devastating truth. My family hadn't just made me invisible at work. They had successfully devalued my very existence, to the point where the man who was supposed to love me saw me as nothing more than a dead-end investment. I wasn't just stuck, I was buried. And as the sun began to rise, a cold, hard thought took root in my soul. If I couldn't dig my way out, I would just have to find a way to bring the whole damn mountain down on top of them. The first week of my self-imposed exile was defined by a profound and ringing silence. I half expected an enraged phone call from my father, a summons to his office for a final brutal dressing down. Nothing. It was as if I had simply evaporated. His silence was the ultimate statement. I was so insignificant that my departure, my act of defiance, didn't even warrant a response. But at Novak Logistics, my absence was creating a deafening roar. Sarah Chun, my loyal source on the inside, became my lifeline. She'd send me short, cryptic texts, painting a picture of escalating chaos. They can't access the primary database. One message read, "Ren keeps locking everyone out." Another a day later, Dominic just yelled at the entire ops team, said the framework is flawless and they're incompetent. 3 people are updating their resumes. The project, my magnum opus, was becoming their albatross. Without me to manage the complex integrations and troubleshoot the data pipeline, it was a beautiful car with no engine. Shipments were getting lost. A massive order for a retail giant was misrouted to a warehouse in Arizona instead of Washington State, causing a contractual penalty that cost the company 6 figures. The client was furious. Dominic's response was to throw money at the problem, offering discounts and empty apologies. Ren's response was to rewrite his PowerPoint presentation, adding more buzzwords. They were trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Sarah told me about a meeting where my father, his face like a thundercloud, had slammed his fist on the boardroom table. "Get it fixed," he had roared. But he wouldn't say my name. It was as if acknowledging my role in creating it would be a greater failure than the project's collapse. Then the official response came. Not a phone call, but a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by a grim-faced courier. It was from Schofield, Price, and Lattimore, my father's notoriously ruthless law firm. The letter inside was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It was a formal cease and desist, full of terrifying phrases like tortious interference, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of trade secrets. They reference my non-compete clause, a document I'd signed without a thought when I first joined the company, and spelled out in chilling detail how they would sue me into oblivion if I even thought about working in the logistics industry in North America for the next 2 years. The most audacious part was the accusation of theft. They claimed the detailed report I had left behind was a clear admission of my intent to steal intellectual property. They were twisting my act of self-defense into a weapon against me. It was a classic corporate strong-arm tactic. Bury the little guy in legal fees until she gives up. I read the letter 3 times, a cold knot of fear tightening in my gut. He wasn't just trying to erase me from the company, he was trying to erase me from my entire career. While this storm was raging, the one true anchor in my life was slipping away. Aunt Sophia's condition had worsened. The hospital became my second home. I'd sit by her bed for hours, the sterile smell of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the warmth she still radiated even as she faded. We talked about everything except the one thing that was consuming me. We talked about books, about old movies, about the funny habits of the nurses. But one afternoon, when the light outside was turning a soft gold, she looked at me, her eyes lucid and startlingly clear. "He's trying to break you, isn't he?" she said, her voice a whisper. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Don't let him," she said, her frail fingers tightening on my arm. "His father broke him. It's a poison that gets passed down. But you, Jessica, you can be the antidote." She paused, taking a shallow breath. "I'm leaving you something. My inheritance. It's not enough to fight your father on his terms, but it's enough to give you a choice. To be free." She gestured to the worn, leather-bound box on her bedside table. "But this is the real gift. My journals. All of them, since I was a girl." "Why?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Because you need to understand the man you're fighting, she whispered. You need to see the boy he was before his father turned him into a weapon. It won't make you forgive him. God knows I haven't. But it will stop you from becoming him. And that's the only victory that matters. She passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 days later. The funeral was a cold, sterile affair, staged with the efficiency of a corporate event. My father delivered a eulogy that sounded like he was reading a summary of a business partnership. He spoke of her loyalty to the family brand. Dominic stood beside him, looking restless, checking his watch. My mother produced a few perfectly timed tears. I saw my sister across the lawn, holding Dominic's hand, her expression unreadable. No one looked at me. No one spoke to me. I was a ghost at my own aunt's farewell. The isolation was absolute. The check from her estate lawyer arrived the following week. It was a substantial amount, more than I had expected. It was a lifeline. That night, with the threatening legal letter sitting on my coffee table like a venomous snake, I opened the leather box. Inside were 24 small leather-bound diaries, filled with my aunt's elegant, looping script. I started with the earliest one, from when she was 12. I read all night, a pot of coffee growing cold beside me, and through her words, I watched my father's soul being systematically dismantled. October 12, 1968. She wrote, Father was furious today. Richard won the county spelling bee. Father took the trophy and told him real men build things with their hands, not with fancy words. Richard cried, and Father locked him in his room. Bing. May 3rd, 1975. A letter came from Cornell. They offered Richard a full scholarship for architecture. He was so happy he was floating. He showed it to Father at dinner. Father didn't even read it. He tore it in half. He said, Your place is here. You'll learn the trucking business, or you'll learn what it's like to have nothing. I saw the light go out in Richard's eyes tonight. I think it might be gone for good. Page after page, it was a story of relentless emotional abuse. A story of a bright, sensitive boy who was taught that his very nature was a form of weakness. He hadn't just joined the family business. He'd been conscripted. He hadn't just buried his dreams. He'd been forced to dig their grave. He had spent the next 40 years becoming the hard, ruthless man his father had demanded, a man who equated intellect with weakness and charisma with strength. I closed the last journal as the first rays of dawn crept through my window. The rage I felt toward my father was still there, but it was now tempered by a profound, aching sadness. He wasn't a monster. He was a tragedy. A man so deeply broken that his only way of coping was to break others, starting with his own daughter, the daughter who reminded him of everything he had lost. But understanding is not absolution. His pain didn't excuse mine. It just clarified the stakes. This wasn't just a fight for my career. It was a fight to break the cycle. I looked at the legal letter from his high-priced lawyers. Then I looked at the check from my aunt. One was a legacy of pain meant to chain me down. The other was a legacy of love meant to set me free. My hand was steady as I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for a boutique law firm I'd researched, a firm known for its aggressive David versus Goliath approach. Yes, I said when the receptionist answered, my voice devoid of any hesitation. My name is Jessica Novak. I'd like to schedule a consultation. I need the best litigation lawyer you have. The war had been declared on me. Thanks to Aunt Sophia, I finally had the resources to fight back. The transition from a high-ranking analyst at a multi-million-dollar corporation to a solo entrepreneur was like diving from a heated yacht into icy, shark-infested waters. My new headquarters was a single wobbly desk in a cavernous co-working space in a less than glamorous part of the city. The air hummed with the nervous energy of a dozen other startups, a symphony of frantic keyboard clatter and hushed, desperate phone calls. The smell of burnt coffee and microwave popcorn was my new reality. My father's lawsuit was a constant looming threat. My lawyer, Maria Fuentes, was a shark in her own right. Sharp, fast, and reassuringly expensive. This is a classic slap suit, Jessica, she told me during our first meeting, after I'd written her a painful retainer check that took a huge bite out of my inheritance. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. He's not trying to win. He's trying to bankrupt you, to scare you into silence. Our job is to show him we won't scare. The first step was building an arsenal. While Maria handled the legal battle, I focused on building my weapon, Nexus Paradigm. My days became a grueling marathon. I'd wake up at 5 o'clock a.m., code for 6 hours straight, then spend the afternoon creating financial models and marketing presentations. In the evenings, I'd be on the phone trying to make connections, only to be met with polite dismissals. The nights were spent debugging my own code, fueled by vending machine snacks and the sheer, stubborn refusal to fail. The loneliness was a physical weight. I knew I couldn't sustain that pace. More importantly, I knew I couldn't build something great alone. I needed a team. I needed the other ghosts of Novak Logistics. My first recruit had to be Sarah Chun. I met her at a noisy, anonymous diner halfway between her house and mine. She looked exhausted. The chaos at Novak was taking its toll on the few competent people left. "He's losing it, Jessica," she said, stirring her coffee endlessly. "Dominic is blaming everyone but himself. Morale is at rock bottom. But I can't leave. I have student loans, a mortgage. I can't just jump ship for an idea." I understood her fear, so I didn't sell her a dream. I showed her the reality. I opened my laptop and walked her through the Nexus Paradigm MVP. I showed her the clean code, the intuitive interface, the powerful predictive engine. I watched as her professional curiosity overcame her fear. Her eyes, tired and worried moments before, now lit up with the spark of a true data geek. "This is elegant," she murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "I can't offer you the salary you're making now," I said honestly. "Not yet. I can offer you a small stipend, enough to get by. But I can also offer you 20% equity. You won't be an employee fighting for a promotion. You'll be a founder, an owner. We build this together. We succeed together." I also told her about the lawsuit. I laid out all the risks, all the ugly possibilities. I gave her the respect of the truth. She left the diner saying she needed to think. Next was Michael Park, the brilliant CFO my father had fired for being a pessimist. I found him working as a consultant, underpaid and overqualified. He was jaded. "So, you want me to leave a stable, if boring job to join an unfunded startup run by the daughter of the man who ruined my career? A startup that is currently being sued by that same man? Is that the pitch?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "That's the pitch," I confirmed. "I'm also offering you the chance to get back at him by building something better, and 15% equity." One by one, I made my case to the others. Tamsin Wright, the product developer. Danny Kowalski, the IT infrastructure genius they'd marginalized. Each one was a risk. Each one was scarred by their experience at Novak. A week after our diner meeting, Sarah called me. Her voice was firm. "Okay, Jessica, I'm in. My husband thinks I'm insane, but I just spent another day watching Dominic try to explain data analytics. I'd rather take a risk on competence." Sarah's commitment was the first crack in the dam. Michael called the next day. "Fine," he grumbled. "But if we go under, I'm holding you personally responsible for my therapy bills." Tamsin and Danny followed. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. We were a team of 5. A tiny island of rebels crammed into a slightly larger rented office, united by a shared history of being undervalued and a burning desire to prove our worth. With a team and a product, I knew we needed capital to survive. I managed, through a sheer stroke of luck and a persistent follow-up email, to get a meeting with Gail Iverson, the prominent VC. This time, I went in with Michael and Tamsin. We were a united front. Gail was just as sharp as I remembered. She listened to our polished pitch without interruption. She let us finish. Then she began to systematically and brutally dissect our entire plan. "Your tech is solid," she conceded. "I'll give you that. Your team is impressive. A bunch of angry, motivated experts. That's a good story. But what's your customer acquisition strategy? Being better isn't a strategy. How are you going to penetrate a market dominated by giants like, well, Novak Logistics?" She pointed a pen at Michael. "Your financial projections are optimistic. They rely on landing a major client within 6 months. What happens if you don't?" Then she turned to me. "And the biggest red flag of all, Jessica, is you. You're in a legal war with your own father. That's messy. It's a distraction. And it spooks investors. What happens when he files an injunction to stop you from operating? My investment could be tied up in court for years." The meeting was a bloodbath. She was right on every point. We walked out of her sleek, minimalist office, feeling like we'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion. "She's not wrong," Michael said quietly as we rode the elevator down. The defeat in the air was thick. The rejection sent a shockwave of doubt through our small team. The initial adrenaline rush of rebellion began to wear off, replaced by the cold, hard reality of our situation. The inheritance money was a finite resource, and our burn rate, with 5 small salaries and Maria's mounting legal fees, was terrifying. The pressure started to create cracks. I walked in one day to find Tamsin and Michael in a heated argument over our development priorities. "We need more features," Tamsin insisted. "We have to be able to offer clients everything Novak does, but better." "We don't have the runway for that," Michael shot back. "We need to focus on a core product and get a client, any client, before we're all living out of our cars." I had to step in, play mediator, and find a compromise, all while my own anxiety was gnawing a hole in my stomach. I was the leader. I had to be the calm center of the storm, even when I felt like I was drowning. The darkest moment came about a month after the meeting with Gail. We had pitched to a dozen smaller companies. We'd had promising conversations, but no one was willing to take a chance on us. The money was running out. Michael's 6-week prediction was now down to 3. I was alone in the office one night, long after everyone else had gone home to their worried families. I was staring at our bank account balance on the screen, the number mockingly small. I felt the weight of my team's mortgages, their student loans, their trust. I had led them here, to this cliff's edge. For a fleeting, desperate moment, I thought about giving up. I actually pulled out my phone and started to draft an email to Maria, my lawyer. What would a potential settlement with my father look like? I typed, "Just surrendering, crawling back, accepting whatever crumbs he threw me." The thought made me sick. I slammed the laptop shut. I had to get out of there. I walked out into the cool night air and just started walking, with no destination in mind. The city was alive, full of people living their lives, completely unaware of the tiny existential battle I was losing inside my own head. Was I a fool, a delusional daughter with a complex, destined to fail spectacularly? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. It was probably Michael with another dire financial update. But I pulled it out. It was a text from Sarah. "I think I found something. A mid-sized distributor, ACS Pharma. Their VP of Ops is an old college friend of my husband. He's been complaining for weeks about Novak service. Major delays, lost shipments. Their contract is up for renewal next month. He told my husband they're actively, desperately looking for a new partner. Maybe this is our shot." I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, reading the message again and again under the orange glow of a street lamp. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a check from a VC. It was one lead, one tenuous, fragile opportunity born from a random connection. But as I stood there, the despair that had been choking me began to loosen its grip. It was replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a flicker of fierce, defiant hope. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. And after weeks of darkness, it was all I needed. We weren't dead yet. The ACS Pharma lead became our single obsession. It was our D-Day, our moonshot, all rolled into one. For the next 3 weeks, our tiny office transformed into a high-stakes command center. Sleep became a luxury we couldn't afford. The whiteboard was covered in a spiderweb of logistics chains, chemical handling protocols, and FDA compliance regulations. We weren't just trying to win a client. We were trying to perform open-heart surgery on their entire supply chain. We dove deep. We learned that their main issue with Novak wasn't just delays, it was temperature-controlled shipments, cold chain logistics for sensitive biologics. A single temperature fluctuation could ruin $1 million batch. Novak, with its one-size-fits-all approach, was failing them. This was our opening. Tamsin and Danny worked around the clock building a specialized module for our Nexus platform. It integrated real-time temperature sensors with predictive route analytics. Our system wouldn't just track a shipment. It would flag a truck if its cooling unit deviated by a single degree and automatically reroute it to the nearest certified cold storage facility. It was a level of precision and proactivity Novak couldn't even dream of. Meanwhile, Michael built a financial model that proved our system would save them, not just from lost product, but from the astronomical insurance premiums they were paying. Sarah and I worked on the presentation, tailoring every single slide to address the specific pain points her contact had mentioned. The day of the presentation, the 5 of us rode the elevator up to their executive suite. We felt like a ragtag commando unit heading into battle. We were up against 2 other logistics giants, both with billion-dollar revenues and slick sales teams. We were 5 people with a laptop and a desperate hope. We were led into a boardroom that was even more intimidating than my father's. The table was filled with a dozen stone-faced executives, including their CEO, Robert Kenwood, a man with a reputation for being brilliant and utterly ruthless. They let the big firms go first. We could hear the slick, canned presentations through the wall. Then it was our turn. We didn't start with a sales pitch. I started with their problem. I put a picture of one of their ruined shipments on the screen. This is what's costing you $7 million a year, I began. For the next hour, we didn't sell them Nexus Paradigm. We sold them a solution. Tamsin gave a live demo of the cold chain module. Michael walked them through the ROI, showing they'd break even in 6 months. Sarah presented case studies we had built using publicly available data. They peppered us with questions. They were sharp, relentless. They attacked our size, our stability, the lawsuit. But we were ready. For every doubt, we had a data point. For every concern, we had a contingency plan. At the end, Robert Kenwood leaned forward, his eyes boring into me. "You're a massive risk," he said, his voice flat. "You're a startup being sued by the biggest name in the business, who also happens to be your father. Why in God's name should I trust my company's lifeline to you?" I met his gaze. "Because the biggest name in the business has grown complacent," I said, my voice steady. "They're selling you a brand. We're selling you a partnership. Because we're small, we will live and die by your success. We are hungrier, we are more agile, and frankly, our tech is better. Give us your single most problematic shipping lane. Just one, for a 90-day paid trial. If we don't exceed every metric you have, you don't pay us a dime." The gamble hung in the air. Kenwood was silent for a long moment, studying my face. Then he gave a curt nod. "You've got 90 days, he said. "Don't make me regret this." We walked out of that building, not celebrating, but knowing the real work had just begun. We delivered. For 90 days, we monitored every shipment, optimized every route. We were on call 24/7. Our error rate was 0. Their on-time delivery rate hit 100% for the first time in 2 years. We didn't just meet their metrics, we shattered them. They signed a full 1-year contract the day the trial ended. We had our traction. 2 months later came the Logistics Today National Conference in Chicago, the biggest event of the year. The keynote speaker was my father. His topic, dripping with irony, was tradition, innovation, and the Novak legacy. I bought a ticket. I flew to Chicago and checked into a cheap hotel far from the convention center. I went to the keynote alone, taking a seat in the cavernous ballroom's back corner. A ghost at my father's coronation. He was in his element. On stage, under the brilliant lights, he was charming, powerful, a lion of the industry. He spoke of his father's vision, of his own hard work, and then he began to speak of the future. He gestured grandly to the front row, where Dominic and Wren sat preening in their $1,000 suits. "And I am so proud," he boomed, "to be passing the torch to this next generation, whose bold thinking is already making its mark with groundbreaking new frameworks." He was building his legacy on my bones. The rage I thought I had buried stirred, but I pushed it down. Patience. His speech ended. The applause was deafening. The Q promenade began. A few sycophantic questions from friendly journalists. Then a man in a crisp blue suit stood up at a table near the front. It was Robert Kenwood. A hush fell as he approached the microphone. The cameras found him. "Mr. Novak," Kenwood began, his voice calm but amplified to fill every corner of the room. "An interesting speech on innovation. My company, ACS Pharma, was a Novak client for over a decade. But this past year, after your next generation took the lead on a key project, our critical shipping error rate climbed by over 40%. We were facing a supply chain crisis." A wave of murmurs swept through the ballroom. On the giant screens, my father's practiced smile tightened. Dominic's face went pale. Kenwood let the tension build before continuing. "We were forced to seek an alternative. We took a risk on a new startup. In 90 days, they completely overhauled our most difficult lane. Our error rate is now less than 1%. Their platform, Mr. Novak, is 5 years ahead of yours." He paused again, a master of theatrical timing. "That company," he announced, his voice like a gavel, "is called Nexus Paradigm." The murmuring exploded. People were grabbing their phones. Reporters were typing furiously. On stage, my father looked like he'd been turned to stone. Then Kenwood delivered the killing blow. "And I believe their founder and CEO, Jessica Novak, is in the audience with us today." He scanned the crowd. "Jessica, would you mind standing up?" A spotlight, clumsy at first, swept across the darkened room before landing on me. Suddenly, my face was on the jumbotrons, right next to my father's horrified expression. The buzz in the room became a roar of shock and speculation. Flashbulbs went off. I rose slowly to my feet. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I looked across the vast room, past the thousands of staring faces, and my eyes locked with my father's. I saw it all in his face, the shock, the fury, the dawning public humiliation. I simply gave a brief, respectful nod to Robert Kenwood, and then I sat down. I didn't need to say a thing. My victory wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet. It was professional. It was a simple, undeniable fact delivered on the biggest stage in our industry. It was checkmate. The conference takedown was an earthquake that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Before I had even left the ballroom, my phone was vibrating with a ferocity I'd never experienced. It was emails, texts, LinkedIn requests from VPs, directors, and CEOs who had just witnessed my father's public unraveling. The video of Kenwood's Q&A, filmed on 100 smartphones, was already circulating on industry forums. When I got back to our hotel suite, which I'd upgraded using the first payment from ACS Pharma, my team was waiting. The mood was electric. For the first time in months, no one looked tired or stressed. They looked like victors. We didn't have a wild party. We just sat there looking at each other, a stunned, joyous silence hanging in the air before we all broke into laughter. The most satisfying moment came with a knock on the door. It was Gail Iverson. She walked in, not with a contract, but with 2 bottles of expensive champagne. "I was in the audience," she said, a wide, wolfish grin on her face. "That was the best damn pitch I've ever seen, and you didn't even say a word." She popped the cork on one of the bottles. "My office will have a term sheet for a $7 million seed round on your desk by Monday morning. Congratulations, Jessica. You've got a real company now. Let's talk about funding your promotion from a startup to an empire." While we were drinking champagne, the atmosphere at Novak Logistics was one of pure panic. The public humiliation was a fatal blow to their brand's reputation for stability. Key clients, already frustrated with declining service, now had the perfect excuse to jump ship. The phones at Nexus Paradigm started ringing off the hook. But the real battle was happening behind the closed doors of their boardroom. Uncle Thomas, whose loyalty to my father had always been absolute, was now facing a revolt from the other board members and shareholders. Their fortunes were tied to the company's stock, which had taken a nosedive the morning after the conference. The nail in my father's coffin, however, was delivered anonymously. Michael, my CFO, had packaged his old research on the accounting irregularities, the very information that had gotten him fired, and sent it via courier to the 2 most powerful independent members on the Novak board. Faced with a public relations disaster, a client exodus, and now evidence of potential fraud, the board acted swiftly and without mercy. There was no gentle retirement. They forced my father out. He was stripped of his title as CEO and chairman. The press release was brutal in its corporate neutrality, speaking of a new strategic direction and thanking Richard Novak for his years of service. It was the corporate equivalent of being shot. A few days later, he called me. I steeled myself for a final epic tirade. But the voice on the other end was one I'd never heard before. It was hollowed out, devoid of its usual booming authority. It was the voice of a king who had been deposed. "Jessica," he said. There was no preamble. "I'll buy your company. Name your price. We merge it into Novak. You take over as CEO of the combined entity. It's the only way to save the family name." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Even now, after everything, he saw it as a transaction. He thought he could buy his way out of his failure, absorb my success, rebrand it as his own. He was still trying to control the narrative. "The Novak name is your problem to solve, Dad," I said, my voice calm and even. "My company is Nexus Paradigm, and it is not, and never will be, for sale." I ended the call before he could respond. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of finality, a quiet closing of a door that should have been shut long ago. The last ghost to be exorcised was my mother. She called me that evening, her voice a shrill, panicked shriek. "How could you do this? After everything this family has given you, how could you humiliate your father like that?" All my life, her words had the power to make me feel small, guilty, but not anymore. "What exactly has this family given me, Mom?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. "A job where my work was stolen? A brother who schemed against me? A father who saw me as an inconvenience?" "You taught me that family loyalty was a one-way street. I just finally learned how to drive." There was a stunned silence on the other end. For the first time, she had no response, no smooth corporate platitude, no guilt-laced appeal to family unity. "I have to go," I said, not waiting for a reply. I have a company to run. I hung up, and with that final click, the last chain broke. I was no longer a daughter waiting for approval, or a sister waiting for fairness. I was just a woman who had built something of her own, on her own terms. And I was just getting started. 6 months after the Chicago conference, the world looked entirely different. Nexus Paradigm had moved into a sleek, 3-floor headquarters downtown. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating an open-plan office that buzzed with a collaborative energy I had only ever dreamed of. The walls were covered in whiteboards, not oil paintings of my ancestors. The culture was one of transparency and merit, the antithesis of the fear and favoritism that had defined Novak Logistics. My own life had changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. The seed funding from Gale had allowed us to scale rapidly. My salary was now a number that would have seemed fictional to me just a year ago, but I quickly learned that the money was the least rewarding part of the victory. The real reward was the freedom to build a company that reflected my own values. We instituted Failure Fridays. Once a month, the entire company would get together, and people were encouraged to talk about a mistake they had made, what they had learned from it, and how the team could avoid it in the future. There was no blame, only analysis. It was a direct response to the blame culture I'd grown up in, where mistakes were hidden until they festered into catastrophes. We celebrated ideas, no matter who they came from. My past life still sent out the occasional ripple. One morning, I got a notification on LinkedIn. It was a message from my sister. "Hey Jess, wow, I see you're a cover story on TechCrunch. Amazing." It's been a while. I don't know if you heard, but Dominic and I are getting a divorce. Total mess. Anyway, I was thinking maybe I was wrong about a few things. I'd love to get coffee and catch up if you're ever free. I read the message twice. The old Jessica would have felt a surge of triumphant rage. The current Jessica just felt a mild, clinical pity. She was a prospector, still digging for gold, and she'd realized she'd abandoned the richest claim. I archived the message without a reply and moved on to my next meeting. She was a footnote in a chapter of my life that was now closed. A far more significant ripple arrived in the form of an official job application. The applicant was Vincent Hayes, the former VP of Novak Logistics, the man who had stood by and watched my public shaming before running after me in the parking garage. He wasn't applying for an executive role. He was applying for a position as a senior logistics manager. I brought him in for an interview myself. He looked older, tired, but also relieved. "Why do you want to work here, Vincent?" I asked him directly. He met my gaze without flinching. "For a year after you left, I tried to help your father hold things together. But it was impossible. The company wasn't just losing clients, it was rotting from the inside. The culture was toxic. All blame, no accountability. I finally realized I was loyal to a man, not to a mission." He exhaled slowly, his voice quiet but steady. "I watched what you built, Jessica. I read your company's value statement. I want to be part of a mission again." I saw the genuine conviction in his eyes. He wasn't just looking for a job. He was looking for a professional redemption. "You'll be reporting to Sarah Chun," I said. "She's tough, but fair." A smile touched his lips. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. I hired him. His presence on our team was a silent daily reminder that competence and integrity would always eventually win out over charisma and connections. Gail Iverson, now a member of our board, was in my office one afternoon. We were going over our quarterly growth charts, which looked less like charts and more like a rocket launch. "Heard the latest on your father?" she asked casually, sipping her espresso. I looked up from the report. "What now?" "He tried to launch a consulting firm. Folded in 3 months. He's selling the family vacation home in Aspen." I looked out the window at the thriving city below. "It's a shame," I said. The words surprised me as they came out. He had all the resources in the world. He built a strong foundation. He just built it on the wrong things. Gail studied me for a moment. "You're not angry anymore, are you?" I considered the question. The hot, searing anger that had fueled me for so long had burned itself out. It had been replaced by a different kind of fire, a steady, creative warmth. "No," I replied. "It's hard to be angry when you're busy building." She raised her coffee mug in a toast. "To building," she said. "To building," I echoed, a feeling of deep, quiet satisfaction settling over me. The 1-year anniversary of Nexus Paradigm's official launch wasn't held in a sterile ballroom or an expensive restaurant. It was a company-wide barbecue at a sprawling state park on a perfect sunny Saturday. The official uniform was shorts and t-shirts. The official scent was a mix of grilled burgers and sunscreen. I walked through the crowd, a bottle of water in my hand, and felt a sense of awe. This was real, this was ours. Sarah Chun, my COO and first believer, was locked in a hilariously intense game of cornhole with Michael Park. Vincent Hayes, looking 10 years younger, was at a massive grill, proudly flipping burgers for a line of hungry employees. The park was filled with the sounds of laughter, of kids shrieking with joy, of dogs barking. It was a community, not a corporation. I saw a group of our newest interns sitting at a picnic table, looking a little overwhelmed. I wandered over. There was no head table, no VIP section, just people having a good time. "Hey," I asked. They all jumped a little, startled. One of them, a brilliant young coder from Caltech named Maya, was nervously clutching a company-issued tablet. "Ms. Novak," she said, her eyes wide. "Yes, it's great. Thank you." "It's Jessica," I said, sitting down on the bench across from her. "What have you got there? Still working on a Saturday?" She blushed. "Oh, no. It's just, I had an idea for a small optimization to the mobile UI for our drivers. It's probably nothing, but I just mocked it up." I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the same fear of being dismissed that I had lived with for years. "It's never nothing, Maya," I said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "An idea is the most valuable thing we have here. Show me." Her face lit up as she began to enthusiastically walk me through her mock-ups, her nervousness melting away into passionate explanation. I looked around at the scene, at the families, the laughter, the easy camaraderie. I thought of the cold, silent boardroom I had left behind. I thought of my father, alone with his crumbling legacy. And a single, clear thought settled in my mind. A final piece of a puzzle I've been solving my whole life. They say it's hard to escape your father's shadow. They're wrong. You don't escape it. You just plant a new tree, one with stronger roots, and you grow it tall enough to cast a shadow of your own. A shadow where things can grow. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to prove your own worth? Share your story in the comments below.